Okay, today we're going to talk about RAW versus JPEG, something that I, even myself until recently, didn't really think too much about. So let me just briefly explain to you what they are. When your camera takes a picture, there's different kinds of ways you can save it, different levels of quality. It depends on the fanciness of your camera. Not all cameras have the same set of options, but most of the nice cameras have options that basically start from what we consider as low quality JPEG all the way to RAW. Okay. And then the JPEG is basically a specific type of image format, and it's generally very compressed. I can't remember off the top of my head what the initials stand for. I'm happy to look it up and write it on the blog if you want me to, but it really doesn't matter. But the point is, if you take a low quality JPEG, it basically saves it as a low resolution JPEG. And if you're only posting photos on a web page and you're never ever printing them, and you're never ever going to print them, then it's perfectly okay to take your pictures a low resolution JPEG. This will be the smallest possible file, which means depending on your card, you can take thousands and thousands of photos without having to download the photos from your camera to your computer. And also it means that when you're opening them, they're kind of small, they'll open quickly, and they'll be able to be put on a web page quickly, and people will be able to download them quickly. So small is generally good unless you want to print. If you want to print, then small is bad. You want high quality, high resolution. So on a very basic level, if you're trying to decide between low quality JPEG and high quality JPEG, basically the only difference is whether you plan on printing those files ever or not. If you're going to print them, I don't know if you can hear the lawnmowers outside, and I apologize if you can't. Anyway, so if you are ever gonna print them, or if you're ever gonna blow them up, and because your camera generally takes them in a certain size, but if you want them larger, you want to make a big poster at 10 by 14, whatever, then you really want as high quality JPEG as your camera will allow you to save. So that's just the differences between the different qualities of JPEG, and I have a class that I've posted on Photoshop tips on resizing an image, and I talk about resolution there a little bit, so I'm happy to refer you to that one so you can understand it when that one's posted. But anyway, the main focus of today is really not different levels of JPEG, but the difference between JPEG and RAW. Now, there's a special file format called RAW that a lot of cameras allow you to have, and that basically means the difference between the RAW and the JPEG is how much post-processing the camera itself will do. So, as I explained to you, there's a sensor in the back of the lens, in the back of the camera, and that's what captures the image. Now, the sensor can capture a particular image, and then what will happen is when that image is being written to your card, which you have a little card that goes inside your camera. I can show you the one that goes in mine. Here's my camera. I have a Canon, and these kind of bigger Canons have an SD card. So if you look here, I'm opening where the card is, and I press this button, and here's my card. I have a 1 gigabyte card. I can talk about that sometime as well, but I always recommend no bigger than 1 gig card, because these cards tend to get corrupted, and if it gets corrupted, you're going to lose a lot of images if your card is really big. So I just have a whole bunch of ones, and I'll change my card when it's full, if I'm in a place where I can't actually download them to my computer. Anyway, so that little card is what the camera writes it on. So what will happen is between the time it captures an image to the time it's writing the image to your card, it'll do something called the post-processing on there. So if you're saving your images as JPEG, what it will do is it'll take the image and it'll compress it. And JPEG is has a certain compression algorithm, and it loses a little bit of the data. And most of the time that doesn't matter. But if you're in funky light situations where you know the light's going to have a certain scan, let's say it's kind of a fluorescent light and it's going to just look bad and you can't really change your settings, or you're not able to adjust white balance well, or if you are going to want to do special tricks on the image, you really want to take the image as RAW. So the post-processing that the computer does on your image, every time any image is post-processed, you're losing a little bit of data. That's just the way it works out. And this normally wouldn't matter, except for every time you lose a little bit of data, your picture gets grainier and grainier. And if you want to process an image, let's say you want to make it more contrasty, you want to make it sharper, you want to do all these actions and things that you do in Photoshop, well, every time you're doing anything on top of that picture, you're basically losing as much of the quality as the original picture as the number of actions you make. So the more you play with the image, the more you're actually ruining the image, quote unquote. So the nice thing about RAW is that it doesn't actually do any processing for you. It literally takes exactly what the sensor saw and saves it onto your card. Now, this means it's really, really large because it saves all the data. It saves like the light exactly as it was, it saves all the colors exactly as it was, etc., etc. And then what you can do is, instead of having the camera decide all the different light ranges for you instead of the camera trying to decide the compression for you. You can do all of that on your computer. So you can open it up in Photoshop, and it has something called a RAW processor, and it will allow you to change the white balance, it'll allow you to change the exposure, it will allow you to change the amount of blacks and whites you have on the picture, etc., etc. So it allows you to do a huge amount of post-processing on the image, which means that when you're taking your photo, you can take photos with a few more problems than you would otherwise. So if you're in an area where you're inside a dark area and you know your photos are not going to come out really well, I recommend that you take your photos in RAW as much as possible, because then you have the largest amount of range of possibilities once you download that picture to your camera to be able to play with it. Now, if you don't ever use a Photoshop, you don't know how to use Photoshop, you don't know how to process stuff, then don't worry about it. Just take your pictures in JPEG and have fun with it. But if you do know it, or if you want to learn how to do it, it is worth it. The only big problem with RAW is that the photos are that much larger, so the amount of space it takes on your card and on your computer is pretty big. It's generally 3 to 4 times larger than the photo in highest quality JPEG. And most RAW pictures also have, most cameras also have an option that says RAW and JPEG. I use mine only on RAW. I used to use it on JPEG, and I actually thought, who needs RAW? Why does it matter? I find out that now that I've switched to solely taking pictures in RAW, the post-processing takes a few seconds extra, but it's totally worth it. It allows me to play with my photos a lot more. It allows me to convert to black and white much better, and allows me to change the exposure, which I do all the time, and it allows me to change the sharpening, which Canon is known for having a little bit soft photos, so I almost always sharpen my pictures. So it just allows me to play with the picture a lot without hurting the original integrity of the photo. And I find that to be very, very useful. So this is just a very long explanation on the difference between RAW and JPEG, but the one thing I want to leave you with is, here's the trick. If you want to learn how to post-process your images, if you have Photoshop and you want to be able to play with it, and if you tend to take pictures in trickier situations, then you want to go with RAW. If you don't know how to use Photoshop and you don't want to learn, or any other processor, image processor, and if you don't have big cards or a lot of space on your computer, then go with JPEG. And if you're ever going to print your photos, go with the highest quality JPEG your computer will, your camera will allow. If you're never going to print them and you're always only going to post them on the web, then go with the lowest quality JPEG or medium quality JPEG. You won't need anything better than that. Alright, I hope this helps, and have a great day. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to leave me comments.